on loan documents. Let me bring in the brain trust now, political strategist and principal of Impact Strategies, Angela Rye, also MSNBC.com national reporter Alex Seitz-Wall, and Ken Blackwell, senior fellow at the Family Research Council and former Ohio Secretary of State. Ken, let me start with you. Some of the details we're hearing about McDonald allegedly asking for $70,000 to benefit a small real estate company that his sister owned, and meeting himself with this businessman in the governor's office to discuss some of these specifics. What do you make of what we are hearing now from a guy? This was a guy who was potentially a presidential candidate and really a major face of the party, a rising star, at least, in the party for so long.
It's another sordid story of political patent place. It's another chapter in a very comprehensive book, from Sir Elliot in New York to Wild Bill in the White House. This really does stink.
It really does stink. But Angela, do you hear anything in here that I guess that stinks to high heaven? And what I mean by that is we're so used to political scandals to some degree we've seen over time and over the years, and not much surprises us. Does anything surprise you about this one in particular?
No, I think it's interesting that you have two very contrary stories, with one saying, well, you know, the governor's wife was taking these things because she was in love with the giver. And then, of course, the giver saying something completely different, meaning, you know, I would never give these types of gifts to anyone without talking to their spouse at, you know, at this amount. So it is very contradictory. Unfortunately, to your point, we have seen this story play out over and over again, whether it's actual, you know, sexual immorality or affairs or adultery or actual just ethics challenges and financial corruption. We've seen it play out over and over and over again. Alex,
is there something to be learned here? A lesson to be learned just about, once again, we're seeing someone that was a rising star. It's just remarkable. And again, he hadn't been found guilty of anything, but does this tell us anything or some lesson to be learned just about, I guess, political office, politicians, and just how dirty and behind the scenes it can be sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, the human drama is incredible, but I think the kind of policy angle here is that Virginia, for a long time, was one of the few states that had basically no ethics rules. You could give anything to public officials. So McDonald thought he was operating within the law. He didn't really, well, his defense is saying that he didn't realize he was breaking the law here and that he didn't do any, you know, quid pro quo for this guy, Johnny Williams. So it's sort of the logical conclusion of, you know, a lot of these attacks that we're seeing at the Supreme Court and at other levels on campaign finance rules. Sort of the logical conclusion of that, you know, where wealthy people can influence people in office with gifts or donations to try to get, you know, favors for their company. It's obviously an extreme and brazen and almost comical version of it, but I think it does highlight, you know, where this could be going if we're not careful.
Ken, let me switch to another gear here, and what we saw the House, Republicans in particular, do in passing a couple of bills having to do with the crisis on the border. Two bills that are going to go nowhere, and everybody understands that. One of them passing almost $700 million to go towards border security. That they passed before everybody went on break. What did you make of it and the strategy in doing so? Because essentially it had to be a strategy, because this wasn't meant necessarily, and everybody knew this bill had no chance of passing the Senate and certainly getting the president's signature.
It appears to me that both sides were playing for the fall election, and they were getting their talking points together, and neither side was particularly interested in finding common ground to secure our borders and to bring some sense of safety both to American cities and to the children that have been transported politically, you know, out of South and Central America. One of the interesting things for me is a picture. If you can just visualize the edge and the border of Central America and Mexico, and then go straight up land and hit the closest American city. It's about 1,200 miles. And you tell me that 8, 9, and 5-year-olds are getting up there by themselves, you know, with no food? This is crazy. This is an attack on our sovereignty.
Angela, let me bring you. I was just about to bring you in here. You say an attack on sovereignty, and Angela, I'll let you. Yeah. I'll let you do the response, but and I know you want to get back in there, Ken. But go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, I'm sorry, TJ. I'm not even going to respond to that. What I will say is that, the former Secretary of State is dead wrong here. This isn't about, talking points going into recess. This is about a party, the Democratic Party, being the big tent party. They have said from the outset, whether it was passing the DREAM Act when they were in control of the House, or their border principles that they've stood on throughout this Congress, or the Senate side passing a comprehensive immigration reform measure that the House refused to take up. This is about Speaker Boehner then saying that they are absolutely going to address immigration reform, and shortly thereafter, when Eric Cantor was the majority leader, him saying that they absolutely wouldn't. So much so that Speaker Boehner put this out in their border principles. One of the great founding principles of our country was that children would not be punished for the mistakes of their parents. It is time to provide an opportunity for legal residence and citizenship for those who were brought to this country as children through no fault of their own. What were they doing yesterday? Everything they did yesterday flies in the face of this particular border principle. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell, you have it wrong.
Ken, I'm going to let you get back. Why an attack on sovereignty versus a humanitarian crisis as you see it? Go ahead.
Just think about it, what I just said, TJ. Yeah. You, in fact, have 5-, 6-, and 8-year-olds coming 1,200 miles with no food and no water. Look, that's crazy. You would have to have the imagination of Jonathan Swift to believe that this isn't a well-orchestrated attack.
Or the courage of Harriet Tubman, Ken Blackwell. I'm not going to let you do this today.
Well, excuse me. Like I said, my message would be to those border governors. While they play around in Washington, do what's within your authority to protect your borders.
Alex, let me get you back in here, and I guess we're seeing kind of how the debate plays out. This led to some tense moments last night after Republican Congressman Tom Marino from Pennsylvania said this about Democrats and the issue. Let's listen, and Alex, I'll bring you in here.
You know something that I find quite interesting about the other side? Under the leadership of the former speaker and under the leadership of their former leader, when in 2009 and 2010, they had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and they knew this problem existed. They didn't have the strength to go after it back then, but now are trying to make a political issue out of it now.
Now, this led to Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. I think we have the video. She stormed over to him in Congress in the middle of that speech and eventually shook his hand, but they had some pretty tense moments. We don't have that up for you there. But Alex, here it is. You can see it on the bottom of you see her down in the bottom of your screen. Ended up eventually shaking his hand. But Alex, what are we to make of? We talk about a crisis we have going on, but we don't seem to be able, any of us, to agree about what to do. And now Congress is taking a vacation, or at least their summer break. Nothing has been done on this issue, and kids continue to cross the border.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, and I think that moment on the floor there with, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democratic caucus, just underscores how emotional this issue has become and how far we've come from the seeming consensus of, just a year and a half ago or 2 years ago after the 2012 election, when the Republican autopsy report said the party needs to embrace immigration reform. You had leaders like Marco Rubio coming out in favor of it, and now we're talking about this. We can't even get this bill done before we go on recess, and the guy leading the opposition to the bill on the Republican side, Ted Cruz, in the Senate, takes off the next day to go to Iowa. And I think that kind of tells you, everything you need to know about some of the political motivations here behind some of the people taking a hard line on immigration. It's an eye towards the election. It's an eye towards the next election, towards 2016.
All right. I'm going to have to leave it there because I'm not completely out of town, but I know if Ken and Angela, if I get y'all back in here,
You're absolutely right.
I'm going to completely run out of time.
You're absolutely right.
I hope Harry Reid brings them back to Washington so the Senate can pass the House bill. Thank you.
That's not going to happen. Bye, Ken.
That's right.
That's not going to happen.
Angela Rye, Alex Seiswald, Ken Blackwell. I will talk to you all again real soon. We're about a quarter of the top of the hour. Up next, Bat Kid begins. New documentary in the works about the 5-year-old Bat Kid who saved San Francisco last year. The producer of that film. Coming up, and as we go to break, another live look from the Fancy Farm picnic in Western Kentucky. Senator Mitch McDonald, his Democratic challenger, are going to be a couple of the highlights there, and they're expected to speak in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
I'm sorry, I just had to get one last photo of the senator before Kentucky voters retire him in November. tired